Okay, so here's your notes for 1.4. This is solving linear equations. The goal here is that you can solve a linear equation. Start off our notes. An equation is it's really a mathematical sentence. With numbers, variables, and an equal sign. All right, that equal sign is what makes it an equation, okay? So it's a mathematical sentence with numbers, variables, and an equal sign, all right? A solution of an equation is a number that makes the equation true, all right? So a number or a value that will make the equation true. All right, so we have some properties that we use to solve equations, okay? And you probably used them, but we weren't really sure what they were, but these are just properties of equality. So the first property you have is the addition property. All right, again, I just put addition, POE, P-O-E stands for property of equality. So the addition property of equality, you would use it if you had something like this: x minus 4 equals 9. All right, so we would use the addition property because what you do is you ask yourself what the variable is. Then you ask yourself, what are you doing to this variable right now? Well, right now we are subtracting 4. And what's the opposite of subtracting 4? Well, the opposite would be to add 4, and that's why this is the addition property of equality. Because you would add 4, and whatever you do to one side of the equal sign, you have to go and do the same thing on the other side, and that's what this property of equality says. The addition property of equality says if you add something to one side, you have to add the same thing to the other side of the equation. These will cancel out, so we get x equals 13. All right, so that's your addition property of equality. Okay, the next one we have is the subtraction property of equality. All right, and the subtraction property of equality, we would use it if we had something like this: x plus 6 equals 14. All right, so if we had x plus 6 equals 14, again, we ask ourselves 3 questions. What's the variable? That's the first question. The variable is x. What are we doing to the x right now? Well, we are adding 6. All right, and then the third question is, what's the opposite of adding 6? And that would be to subtract 6, and that tells us what we have to do. So we would subtract 6. Again, whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other side. They'll cancel out, and we get x equals 8. All right, and then again, that's using the subtraction property of equality, and that is the step right there. That is when you use the subtraction property of equality. Just like this step, that's when we used the addition property of equality. Okay? All right, our next one is our multiplication property of equality. All right, and we would use the multiplication property of equality if we had something like this: x divided by 3 equals 6. All right, again, go through those 3 questions I told you. The first question is, what's the variable? Well, the variable is x. What are we doing to the variable right now? Well, we are dividing it by 3. All right, and that was the second question. The third question is, what's the opposite of dividing by 3? And the opposite of dividing by 3 is to multiply by 3. So that tells us what we would do to solve this equation. And again, whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other side. That's what the multiplication property of equality says. So now these 3's cancel out. Leaves us with x equals 18. All right. You could also see the property the multiplication property used if we would have had this. Let's do z divided by 5 equals 6. All right? So again, we would ask ourselves that same 3 questions. What's the variable? The variable is z. Second question, what are we doing to the z right now? Well, we're dividing it by 5. All right? And then the third question is, what's the opposite of dividing by 5? And that's to multiply by 5. So here we would multiply by 5, and whatever we do to one side, again, we have to do the other side. This multiplying by 5, dividing by 5 cancels out, so it leaves us with z equals 6 times 5 is 30. Okay? And again, that is the multiplication property of equality. Right? And then our last property we're going to get is the division property of equality. Okay, and the division property of equality we would use if we had something like this. 7x equals 42. Okay, so again, our questions. First question is, what's the variable? The variable is x. Second question, what are we doing to the x? Well, right now we are multiplying it by 7. Third question, what's the opposite of multiplying by 7? And that will be to divide by 7. And again, that tells us what we have to do. And again, the division property of equality tells us if you divide one side by 7, you got to divide the other side by 7. So we do that, the 7's cancel out, and we get x equals 6. All right, so those are the 4 properties that we're going to be using to solve equations. All right, and the answers to this question, how do you solve a linear equation, is basically you use the properties of equality. And that is how you solve it, to get the x by itself. All right, that's how you know when you solve the equation is the x's or the variables on one side by itself. All right, so here's our examples. These, everybody should be able to do. These are the one-step ones. All right, so the first one, we got x minus 8 equals 12. Again, asking those 3 questions. What's the variable? It's x. What are we doing to it? We're subtracting 8. What's the opposite? Adding 8. So we would add 8 to both sides and get x equals 20. All right, b, I have y minus 7 equals 5. What's the variable? It's y. What are we doing to the variable? We're subtracting 7. What's the opposite of subtracting 7? To add 7. So again, this would be our addition property of equality. They cancel out, and we get y equals 12. Right? And then c, we have 3z equals 24. Again, 3 questions. What's the variable? Variable z. What are we doing to it right now? We are multiplying it by 3. What's the opposite of multiplying by 3? And that's to divide by 3. So we divide both sides by 3. Again, that division property of equality lets us do that. And we get z equals 24 divided by 3, which is 8. Right, and then d. Again, our 3 questions. What's the variable? The variable is k. What are we doing to the k? Well, right now we're dividing it by negative 4. What's the opposite of dividing by negative 4? And that is to multiply by negative 4. So we're going to multiply both sides by negative 4. Because again, the property of the multiplication property says that whatever you do to one side, you have to do the other. The negative 4's cancel out, leaves us with k by itself, which is what we want to get the variable by itself. And then we multiply here. Positive times negative is a negative. 4 times 14 is 56. So we get our answer. All right. So those were all the easy ones. Those are the one-step equations. All right, then we have the 2-step equations. Now, again, they were one-step equations because it took us 1 step and we got our answer. 1 step, we got our answer. So now with the 2-step equations, it's going to take us more than 1 step. It'll take us 2 steps to get the answer. All right, so here's example 2. We have negative 3x plus 6 equals negative 12. Okay? Now, again, if we go back to our 3 questions, what's the variable? The variable is x. What are we doing to the x right now? Well, we're multiplying it by negative 3, and we are adding 6. Okay, so we're doing 2 things to it. All right, we got to get rid of both of those things. You have to get rid of addition or subtraction first, okay? So we get rid of this adding 6 by subtracting 6. Again, we do the opposite. They cancel out, leaves us with negative 3x equals negative 18. Again, the signs are the same. So when the signs are the same, you add them and keep the sign. All right, now we look, do we have our x by itself? And the answer is no. We're still multiplying by negative 3, so we have to divide by negative 3. They cancel out, and we get x equals positive 6. Because a negative divided by negative is a positive. 18 divided by 3 is 6. All right, another example of a two-step equation. Again, our variable is q. We are adding 8, and we are multiplying by negative 4. Got to get rid of addition or subtraction first, so we're going to subtract 8. Leaves us with negative 4q, because they cancel out, equals 32. And then we divide by negative 4. And we get q equals negative 8. All right? So those are two-step equations. All right, now we're also going to get problems where you have to solve equations that have variables on both sides. Now what I do is I always like to get the variables together first, all right? And I always move them over to the left, okay? So I'm going to move this 5p over to here. I'm going to get rid of it from this side. So to get rid of it from this side, I have to subtract 5p. And again, whatever subtraction property says, whatever you do to one side, you have to do the other side. So I subtract 5p. Right, now, signs are different. So the rule is we subtract, take the sign of the higher number. So 5 minus 3 is 2. 5's bigger and it's negative. So it's going to be negative 2p plus 7 equals, these cancel out, and that sign stays with it, so negative 1. And now we're to a two-step equation, which we just did. So we're going to subtract 7. Leaves us with negative 2p equals negative 8. And then we're going to divide by a negative 2. And we get p equals 4. All right? And that's how, when we know we're done, the p is by itself, or the variable is by itself. All right. B. We have 8b minus 16 equals 13b plus 9. Again, I'm going to move this over. So I'm going to subtract 13b. Subtract 13b. They cancel out. This gives me a negative 5b minus 16 equals 9. So now I'm going to add 16. And I get negative 5b equals 25. And then I'm going to divide by a negative 5. Divide by a negative 5. They cancel out. Leaves me with b equals positive divided by negative is a negative. 25 divided by 5 is 5. So I get b equals negative 5. All right. And those are our ones with equations with the variables on both sides. All right. Now we got a checkpoint. All right. So I'm going to pause the video here. Let you give you some time to do the checkpoint, and then we'll go over it. All right, so you should have the checkpoint done now. So the first one, simple one step. The variable is x. We're dividing it by 4, so we multiply both sides by 4. And I get x equals negative 28. All right. Second one's a two-step, so I'm going to get rid of this 1 first. I'm going to add 1. Leaves me with 5n equals 10, and then I'm going to divide by 5 and get n equals 2. All right, number 3 is one with variables on both sides, so I'm going to move this m, so I'm going to subtract 1m, subtract 1m. It gives me m minus 5 equals, they cancel out 3, and then I'm just going to add 5. And I get m equals 8. All right, and then number 4, I'm going to subtract the 2r. Leaves me with negative 6 plus 5r equals negative 9. Right? I'm going to get rid of this minus or this negative 6 by doing the opposite, which is to add 6. That leaves me with 5r equals negative 3. And then I'm going to divide by 5. Divide by 5. Now that doesn't divide out and doesn't simplify, so that's my answer. R equals negative 3/5. And I'll just leave that as my answer. All right, and the last one we got to do, example 4, is we have the distributive property. So anytime you see parentheses, you have to do the distributive property. So what you're going to do is, when you have this that look like this, you got to simplify both sides first. All right, then you'll solve. So the first thing we have to do is we got to distribute the 2. So 2 times 5x gives me 10x. 2 times 6 gives me minus 12. Here we're going to distribute a negative 4. Negative 4 times x gives me negative 4x. Negative 4 times negative 3. Negative times negative is positive. 4 times 3 is 12. And then I bring down this 4. All right, you don't distribute anything to it because it's not in the parentheses. All right, this side simplified. 10x minus 12. On this side, we got to combine our like terms. So I got negative 4x plus 16. All right, now both sides are simplified. So now I'm going to solve it. So I'm going to bring this over to the other side. Again, it's subtracting 4x, so we're going to add 4x to get rid of it. So it gives me 14x minus 12 equals 16. I'm going to add 12. Gives me 14x equals 28. And then I'm going to divide by 14 and get x equals 2. All right. And then the last one, again, we're going to distribute the 4. 4 times 2x gives me 8x. 4 times 9, 36. Distribute the negative 3. Negative 30. And negative times negative is positive, 3x. Combine my like terms on this side. I'm going to move the 3x over, so subtract 3x. Leaves me with 10x minus 36 equals negative 30. I'm going to add 36 and get 10x equals 6. Divide by 10 and get x equals, now I can simplify this. They're both divisible by 2, so 6 divided by 2 is 3. 10 divided by 2 is 5. So I get my answer, x equals 3/5. And that's it.